welcome and thanks a lot, first of all, to take the time and after a long day of training, still take the time to talk to us here. So welcome. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me and giving me the chance to talk about the new Scrum Guide. So maybe a little bit about myself first. Originally, as mentioned before, I'm from Germany. I studied computer science, so programming is my background. That's what I've done a big part of my career. So I started to program in '97 in Germany for a consulting company in Nuremberg and Frankfurt and so on. And I realized early on that using the right technology, fulfilling all the requirements doesn't necessarily make the product successful. And this is kind of where I looked into then alternative ways, and I detoured over the rational unified process, extreme programming. I ended up with Scrum, which I probably started to work with in 2001, something like that. So from '97 till 2000, a couple of years of programming in between. After Germany, I spent some time in the UK working there for Oracle. I was Y2K, the Y2K bug, .com boom, all of these things. That's when I moved to the US, 1 year on the East Coast, New York. Then the bubble burst. I had to find a new job. I moved to the West Coast, Bay Area, to a life science company who wanted to transition from the unified process to Agile, which was a good fit for me. So I spent there about 6 years helping building up infrastructure, training teams, doing all of that. And then I joined ThoughtWorks out of their San Francisco office to help clients in the Bay Area mostly, also kind of various things. It was more like some process stuff as well, but often still very technical. In 2009, I moved back to Europe. My wife, she's from the south of France. I'm from the south of Germany. So we agreed, let's meet somewhere in the middle, which would have been Italy, the Alps somewhere. So we settled for Switzerland. So that's where I'm living right now for 10 years. And I have my own company, Effective Agile, where I give trainings like today, but also help companies make a transition to Agile or help them if they run into problems in that regard. Since 2010, I'm a trainer with Scrum.org. I'm in the top 10 of trainers, if I got the numbers right. I'm one of the first in Europe as well. I trained close to 8,000 people in all bits and pieces of the world, essentially. In that context, so kind of my highest interest in Scrum is kind of product ownership, because I strongly believe the best development team on the earth doesn't help you. Sorry, the best developers, no more development team. The best developers doesn't help you if you build the wrong product. Yeah. So I'd rather build the right product slightly bad instead of building the wrong product right. So kind of this is where, and in this context, I think it was mentioned, if I understood this correct, a book I wrote together with Don McWill about proper product ownership, the professional product owner, which has been translated into Polish, Chinese, and the German version is coming out by the end of the year. And I also have some articles in the 97 Things Every Scrum Practitioner Should Know, which was kind of organized by Gunter Verheyen. So I love the new Scrum Guide. I think it is a piece of art, in my opinion, because it really kind of got simplified, got more to the point. And I'll talk about a couple of things, what they mean for me, essentially. Like, this is the old guide. The new one looks a little bit more, I don't know, no pictures on it anymore, but again, great Scrum Guide. And let me talk a little bit about this, what it means for me. I mean, to be honest, I don't think there are too many changes in the way I work and act with Scrum. I've been doing this now for close to 20 years. I think I have understood how Scrum works. So I know how done is important to be done at the end of the sprint and all of those things. So it basically reinforces most of the principles I have already kind of understood. But no, the 2017 edition had close to 18 pages. The new one is around 13 pages. So it's less. And it really helped to get away, if you look into that, the word software does not appear once. Testing is probably mentioned once, I think, somewhere on page 3 about if you test something, you need to test it or something. It really got cleaned up in that regard, because the beauty is that Scrum is now being used outside of software a lot. I had a lawyer in my training, and she wants to run her law office with Scrum. It's like, okay, so we sat together at the lunch break, and this was before Corona. We talked about that, and it was really, really interesting, like the ideas you can really take out of the context of software development and bring it into other areas as well. So it got simplified. And the other problem is with in the old guide, something was explained in the Scrum theory chapter paragraph, and then it was explained in the Scrum team chapter, and it was always slightly differently explained, and that has the problem that you understand it always slightly different, and it confuses a reader. So now everything is explained once, precisely, and that's about it. So there's no ambiguity in there anymore. And it really helps to see how you can apply Scrum outside the area of software product development. So it's less prescriptive. Let me clean up here. So again, I mentioned there's no repetitions anymore. So the things where you can really see how it was cleaned up is the 3 questions. So there were the 3 questions in the Scrum Guide in the very first version from 2010, I think it was. Then 2017 made them kind of, yeah, these are the kind of questions you could ask. The problem with the 3 questions I always personally had is they are not about the Scrum sprint goal. They're about I as a developer. And that's not what's important. The sprint goal, the achievement of the sprint goal is important. So now they are not even in there anymore. And it's really like, what can the developers discover, come up with an ad hoc planning in the daily Scrum. So no software IT related terms are in there anymore. They're completely removed. And one of the things which is an interesting change, which got a little bit of a pushback, is in the past it said basically at least one sprint backlog, one improvement item out of the retrospective has to be put into the next upcoming sprint backlog, which is all in there as well. But it's mentioned, it's like it's a good practice to do so. And I personally think it's good because not everything has to be done immediately within a sprint. These are things maybe you can hand out to someone outside. If it's a good practice, by all means, still do that. So even because it got simplified, it reinforces it much more. It is a framework. It is not a method. You have to think for yourself. You have to use your brain. Now, whenever I thought about the sprint planning, I always ask people, so, but why are doing, let's say you have a development team of 7 developers. If you just look at the salary you're going to buy those people, that's lots of money. I always ask people, why are we spending that? And it's so interesting. The word sprint goal was mentioned 27 times in the Scrum Guide of 2017. 27 times, and it was not part of official Scrum. So something which is more often mentioned than product backlog, not being part of the Scrum Guide, of the Scrum framework. It's kind of, this was a little bit awkward for me. And now it's in there. So essentially, the why, the reason behind spending all this money behind putting the people together, have to work together for the length of a whole sprint, that is the goal you want to achieve. It provides focus, one of the values of Scrum. So why what is now really clearly intertwined. So it really shows also the collaboration between product owner and developers is important. Like, hey, I would like to have that. And then you engage with the developers. Yeah, we could do this here, probably not, but we could do this as an alternative. How would this work? And through this discussion, you discover kind of the goal of the sprint and probably what is a good forecast, how we think we can achieve that. And once this is there, the developers come up with the plan. So now it's the 3 topics, like why, what, how. In the past, we only had the 2 topics, what and how. So much clearer in that regard for me. So then we had the roles, and if you still want to talk about the roles, I agree with that. But the way I thought about the 2017 way of how the roles are being used is that this is the development team. So the Scrum Master was sitting on the intersection between the outside world and the inside world of the development team, and the product owner was somewhat outside. And this heavily reflected Agile 20 years ago, when we wanted to bring business and IT together. This is when IT was this building on the other side of the parking lot where those weirdos were sitting. Now, IT has really kind of leapfrogged out of this into our core industry. Pretty much, there's nothing which will work without software these days. So, but there was still the thinking, well, you're the product owner, and often in my trainings I ask them, so what is a Scrum Master doing? And the answer was, well, the Scrum Master's there to bridge between the product owner and development team. And I was asked, so why don't the developers talk directly to the product owner? Yeah, this probably, they didn't really know. Now, the way you can think about this now is that now there is the Scrum team, which as a whole, as one unit, is accountable to create valuable product. However, within that Scrum team, there are specific accountabilities we expect from specific people to step up and do. So while the Scrum Master is there to make sure the framework is properly implemented, there's improvement happening, he coaches the team, and he does everything kind of removal of impediments and those things. Then the product owner now has moved into it, making sure the developers really understand what's going on, what is the idea behind the product, broadens their horizon in that regard. And then we have the developers, and it's totally okay. This is how you scale, that some of the developers also think like small product owners, that they step up. If you have business analysts, UX people, they probably know about what the product should be doing, and they can also maybe even go ahead and challenge the product owner. So for me, product development for me right now is a team sport. It's nothing you can do as one person anymore. However, one person is accountable. And this is often the question, like, this is also a good cleanup in the Scrum guide, is now the difference between accountable and responsible. And many languages, I'm currently helping some colleagues to translate the Scrum guide into German. And for us, accountable, responsible, if you translate it, it's the same word. But now in English means accountable, you are the person who basically will. Let me give another example. Like, maybe Enron 2001, when it was, what was the brownouts, basically. So then the CEO who committed suicide eventually, but he had to go to court. And the CEO basically said he is responsible for what happened, but he is not accountable. And the judge looked at him and says, no, sir, this is not how it works. You are accountable. The responsibility was with other people, but you are accountable. So, and this is now really clear. There are accountabilities. The value of the product remains with the product owner. Some aspects of that can very well be delegated, the responsibility of certain activities, into the Scrum team to other people. So this is kind of, it brings the team spirit much more into that. So this is kind of why I think this is also a good change in the Scrum guide. The next one, the product goal. I'm loving this as well. So usually, I mean, the way we wrote in our book, Don and I, we really said a vision is important. If you just keep on working, this is progress, but it could go in the wrong direction. So you always have to have a goal you want to achieve. And that's just a vision. However, the problem with visions is that they're often very aspirational. Maybe something which would take years. Maybe you can't even reach it ever at all, but it's like a really like, this is a state we want to get to eventually. Sweden, for example, they have the vision, no death in traffic. Will they ever get there? Maybe if they have a lucky year. But every year they do improvements. They change traffic intersections. They put lights into crosswalks and stuff like that. And over time, the death count is going down. So that's an aspirational vision. Will they ever achieve it? Hopefully, that would be nice. But now the sprint goal. Now, if you look at the dimensions here, so kind of a vision is very strategic, but also has a high risk. But it's kind of like out into the future. Now, a sprint goal is much more tactical. What could we do, let's say, in 2 weeks? Has lower risk, less strategy. And on this axis we have in between, this is where the product goal can move. It's something which is basically sitting between the sprint goal and the vision you're aiming for. And essentially, and I think Jeff Sutherland said that essentially the product goal was always there. It just didn't have a name, and now it has a name. Now, I used to talk about that before the term product goal was coined, a mission. You have a mission. You might have several missions towards that vision, essentially. So now it's called product goal. It's like something like, okay, this is what we want to achieve as the next core value we want to put into our product. And one of the things is especially the way you have to think about product ownership. It's not that basically you are the guy at the bottom who make things happen. Because what we often see is that there's a product manager up there and then a product owner down there, and there's this disconnect. Don and I, we call it the vacuum. So the product management vacuum. And then there's often a product manager up there and a product owner down there, but there is this disconnect. So the product manager would not understand the challenges and the problems the people doing the work have down there, and the product owner will not understand the bigger picture of why we are doing something. So essentially, product ownership is product management in an agile way. So we want to have those slices through that. So idea about the product vision we're going to do in regards to the strategy, and then we go through everything and think about this bluish kind of similar thing here as a product goal. We take something out there and we really implement it through all the layers through. So the product goal is a very good thing. And maybe just something I wanted to bring up here as well is that in all my trainings, I always ask my students, now, what is your sprint goal? Well, we didn't have one. So, and in regards to that, I think the sprint goal is really important, because if you don't have a sprint goal, you just stay busy. Now, the product goal really also reinforces the importance of having a sprint goal. Because if you suddenly have a product goal, you should also think about how can we get to this product goal in form of our sprint goals. And this is kind of the way you can think about that. So it states that the product goal is the reason for the product backlog to exist. So essentially, the manifestation of your product backlog is there to generate something new or improve your existing product in regards to customer value. And this is kind of the reason why the product backlog exists, because there's a goal we want to achieve. And as you move more towards that goal by implementing the product backlog, things change, new ideas come up. And essentially that means that at some point you just say, good enough. We reached the goal, or what we have is not totally there, but we see other priorities coming up. So you take it off and you bring in another one. And this often then means some rework, some updating of the product backlog. So there's ongoing transitions. So essentially it also states in the Scrum guide, you either reach the product goal or you abandon it before taking on the next one, but there's always only one product goal, kind of what you achieve for. And this aligns really well with this vision, value, validation thinking. So because the goal of the product should always be to add more value. What can you do right now in that regard? And yes, this is the last point, 7. So self-organizing versus self-managing. And there's a little bit of controversy behind that. And the way you should understand that is that self-organizing is about who and how, which worked good in the past. We had the development team and somebody told them, well, please do that for me. And they could figure out who's doing it and how are they going about it. Now, self-managing goes further. It's like, why are we doing something in regards to coming from the product owner? What are we doing in regard to the why? And then they can also figure out how are we going, who's going to do that, and how are we going to do that, and ... maybe some other things. And I have more and more companies. I've been working with pharmaceutical companies with many people and so on. They start to thinking about this agile finance. Now, how do you speak your budget? If you really think about that, the way you speak your budget has a huge impact about how agile your organization can be. Because if I have to tell my boss in August what I will be doing the following year, you put on the shackles. Because I told someone I will do this. This is my scope. I think it will take so long. This is a forecast. So the scope is a commitment. The schedule is a forecast. And therefore, I think it will cost so much. And then I will get measured against staying compliant against the plan. Now, we have to get out of this annual budgeting thinking, and there's this no budget approach or rolling budgets, and beyond budgeting talks about this as well. And I see this more and more happening in even large organizations, 100,000 plus people. Agile HR. How do you make sure you hire the right people with the right mindset? How can you change the hiring? How can you change the annual review process? And all of these things. This is also a big impact. And I think, this is also more going towards me for being self-managing. So I think this is not a must. You don't have to do that. But if your company is ready for doing that, absolutely, you should embark on that journey. Maybe agile, ... whatever comes up to your mind. So essentially, kind of, these are the changes I think which are really sticking out for me in the current Scrum Guide. For me, Scrum is still Scrum. It hasn't really changed. And I mentioned that essentially, as I started working with Scrum in 2001, I made so many mistakes. Looking back, it's embarrassing, but making mistakes is the best way of learning. And I'm still learning. And for me, it's still keep the spirit of the game. And again, Scrum is a framework, and there's a spirit behind Scrum. And once you have identified that and you live it up to the spirit, kind of, you are really well aligned with the Scrum Guide. Anyway, whether it was the older version and it's not a 2020 version, I think you had done the right thing anyway. So that's kind of my thinking about the Scrum Guide. And one more thing is, maybe we can share it later on, but I put a link on there. Maybe I can just put it in the chat window. So I put together a couple of videos about some changes for the Scrum Guide as well. Let me just maybe put it in there. Here we go. Cool. So anything else? Anything I can answer? Or anything you want to talk with me, Fabian, about that?
Thanks a lot, Ralf, first of all, for the great overview. Maybe a few questions. So, for example, what's your favorite change and why?
Oh, my favorite change. This is a hard question. This is really a hard question. I think if I really think about it, my favorite change is that the definition of done and the sprint goal, now part of the Scrum framework. For me, they felt like stepchildren. They're sitting at the table, they're part of the family, but they aren't really. Again, the sprint goal was mentioned 27 times, but it was not part of this. The sprint goal was so important. It was not part of the Scrum framework, but now it's in there. We say, now the commitment of the sprint backlog is the sprint goal. The commitment of your increment is your definition of done, and the commitment of the product backlog is your product goals. And I think this is, for me, the most beautiful change in the Scrum Guide.
Exactly. I would like to do a follow-up question, but I would like to put some context to that question. It's actually related to that question also. But
okay.
You said, and I totally agree, Scrum hasn't changed. It's still the same Scrum. But that doesn't mean that there are not teams out there that apply Scrum in a good way, and other teams maybe have some room for Scrum optimization, let's say.
Okay, yeah.
So I think if a Scrum team was doing good Scrum before the Scrum Guide update, it's still doing good Scrum, and the Scrum Guide's probably not even, the change probably doesn't even affect them. But for example, the points you just mentioned, the sprint goal and the definition of done, the product goal. So there were obviously, or there was room before to do that differently. So let's say we have a team where those things are not applied in a good way. Now there's the new Scrum Guide that makes it very clear. So this is the commitment for each of the artifacts. How would you implement this change? What would you do to help the team or to recommend the team to implement this change?
So I think for teams starting off fresh with Scrum, if they read now just the 2020 guide, I think it's much more clear. We should have a sprint goal. Now for teams who have been doing Scrum, I would probably urge them, come on, read the new Scrum Guide and see where you see differences. Because again, in my trainings, I often ask, so who of you is doing Scrum? And hands go up, many hands, and ask them, so cool, keep your hands up. Now, if you answer the next question with no, put your hand down. And I ask them, so okay, so who of you is having a definition of done? And a few hands go down because they don't have a definition of done. So how can you plan for something if you don't know what you actually have to do to be in a releasable or shippable or whatever mechanism it is to deliver it to your customer? And then I ask them, so okay, cool. So who of you had a sprint goal last sprint you worked on? Most hands go down. And just say, so you think you're doing Scrum, but you're not doing those things. And then I talk about that. So I think now for those people, it's easier, because in the past I could say, yeah, but it's just mentioned in the text. It's not really stated that you have to have it, that it's important. And now you could just take them back and just, what, let's go into the Scrum Guide. We just say, increment, you have something which is done at the end of the sprint, and that's your definition of done. So you have to plan in the sprint planning to reach this level of doneness that you can ship it. Or for the same thing for the sprint, well, you should have a goal what you want to achieve, because the sprint backlog can change, but the goal can't. I mean, the only reason for canceling a sprint is that the sprint goal becomes obsolete. And this is now much more, you can really point, say, here, read it, please. This is important. So it's there. It makes it easier.
That's definitely a big change and important change. I also like it. There are minor changes, but there are actually some minor changes that caused, I think, more discussions than the big changes. And one of them was taking out the 3 questions of the daily Scrum. So I understand, well, if you want to, and that works for you, you can still use the 3 questions, but a very frequent question that we get now is, okay, if we don't use the 3 questions, how do we do the daily Scrum then? So what would you?
For me, if you think about it, and if I can observe, if a company calls me, we're doing Scrum, we're struggling, I always ask, is it possible for me to observe a daily Scrum without being spotted, like being a fly on the wall? It tells me a lot. And I saw people like they're standing in the circle, and this one guy says, well, I'm doing this, and then I do that, and then I don't have a problem. And the next one says, no clue what you're talking about. But what often happens is that in the sprint planning, you do product backlog item A, you do B, you do C, you do D, and we put the name in the tool, and then everybody works in isolation in a small silo, and they're making progress. And in daily Scrum, I just say, well, I'm here, I don't have a problem. Next one, no clue what you're talking about, but I'm doing this, and I don't have a problem. And they perfectly answer those 3 questions. But they talk not to each other. They're not a team. And then make progress. And at the end of the sprint, it's like, oh, we are 95% done. No, there's no value. There's actually nothing to show in the sprint review. Now, since the 3 questions have gone, now maybe we should talk to each other. Maybe just say, you know what? There is this item on the board. Actually, there's just some testing missing, but otherwise, if we do this and this, maybe another 2 hours of work, we could show to the product owner and get it accepted for the sprint review. Oh, come on, let's do that. I'll have a coffee. I have another call I have to do, but in half an hour, we could sit down and do it together if you want to. Now, this is what I want to see. This is really a team pulling together, making an ad hoc plan in the daily Scrum. And by the way, the daily Scrum is not a status report meeting. It's often the Scrum Master points fingers. What if you? No. It's a just-in-time planning meeting from the development team for the development team. And I think it makes it more clear since the 3 questions have gone, because you could go by the book. We did the 3 questions, and you don't talk to each other. Now, think about how you could talk about. I like to walk the board. You go top down. I have a product backlog item. Well, okay, how are we doing? Because you should try to move each one of those product backlog items as quickly to done as possible, so that you have like a staircase burn down chart for your product backlog items in your sprint burn down. And what could we do to make the first item done, the next one, the next one, the next one? This makes people talk to each other. So walk the board. Just Google it, walk the board in Scrum. That's a very good practice. I would encourage most people to do.
Okay, great. Actually, it was one of the things Dave also recommended. So thanks. There's another minor change, but I think that has particular here in Latin America impact. So also I would like to put it into context. And so here we have in several teams, not to say many teams, seen the situation that the Scrum Master is reduced to almost to a secretary of the team. Okay, there's meetings and maybe going to the retrospective with a funny game, and that's all he's doing. And that there was a minor change in the Scrum guides where they changed servant leader to real leader that serves. And I think they always meant the same. I think Ken and Jeff always had the same kind of prototype of a Scrum Master in their mind, but they made this small change. So what would you do in a situation? How would you implement that if you have a team where the Scrum Master is reduced to secretary tasks and to make him a leader that serves?
I mean, the change from servant leader to, I think the intention behind that is that there was some understanding that that the Scrum Master is there to just make the team happy, kind of this. I'm not sure. I'll say kumbaya, like, oh, we all love each other and everything. And if you get there and it works for you, awesome. By all means, enjoy it and go with it. But I often also see is that, and think about, if you have kids, you know, you try to grow them into self-thinking, independent adults. And with that, you would talk to them. You would say, hey, no, you have to make a decision. We can look at options and let's talk through that. And you help them to think through certain processes and come up with an answer. But there might be situations that stop doing that. No. And because you just know if they would do that, they could be very bad health-wise or otherwise. And these are the different stances we see, like as a Scrum Master, you have to take on, and not using the word servant leader explicitly anymore. It means you can be sometimes really hard on your team and push them. And I think this is, and you can do this also in a respectful way. So this doesn't mean you lose the but, and this is kind of, I think this is the important aspect. So as a Scrum Master, sure, you're there. It's like a parent, but once in a while, if things go wrong or something, if you have to shout, if you have to get loud, if you have to tell people to stop to do certain things, by all means, you are allowed to do that. It's not just about, oh, I don't think we are happy anymore, let's talk to each other. But sometimes you have to have other practices you have to put in place.
Thanks, Ralph, for that. That was a very good explanation, I think, and it's an important one because that is seriously something that we see in the region a lot. And yeah, I think that's the intention of that change. I hope it will have positive impact. So great. I also think you made pretty clear all the other changes. So that was an awesome summary of the changes. Is there anything else before we look into some Q&A from our participants, that would you like to mention, or that you think is important, particularly in terms of implementing stuff that teams haven't done so far?
I often get asked questions, if you would boil down to one sentence, what if you would boil Scrum down to one sentence, what would it be? And I'm thinking about the sentence again and again, and my current answer is having something done at the end of the sprint. Maybe you want to have so much done every sprint, but you can only do this much. But this is your current reality. This is how much progress you can do reliable every sprint. And again, this is where then this is probably a product owner which is not happy. And this is now where a Scrum Master comes in, which is really, really important because now the Scrum Master would have to work with the team. So, okay, what is holding you back from maybe instead of achieving only one item in a sprint to bringing it up to two? We are struggling here and here. Okay, so is there something I can do to help you? And so on and so on. So kind of this is, and then you slowly inch your way up. Now, the way I think about it is like if somebody would ask me, hey, Ralph, how high can you jump? You know, Fosbury flop, like what you see at the Olympics and so on. And I would say, you know, I did that the last time, maybe, I don't know, 35 years ago. I don't know, 2 meters maybe. And then you would ask me again in 2 weeks time. And I would say, you know what? I don't know. I don't even reach the bar. I always fall underneath. I don't even hit it. And because if you always put your forecast too high and you never achieve it, you don't know how much you can achieve. Maybe I have to go down to 1 meter. Yes, I can do that. 1.10 meters. Yes, I can do that. And maybe my reality is 1.34 meters. And then I can just say, okay, this is my, let's say, velocity. This is what I can achieve reliable. This is something I can work with. But now let's bring in a coach or some other techniques. And maybe eventually I'm at 1.50 meters. And this is basically how you have to scale back. You have to become slower to find out what you're capable of doing, and then you can work your way back up again. And this is again where the Scrum Master then comes into the picture as the team coach and so
on. That's great. It's a good metaphor. Probably going to use that in the future.
Sure.
So, yeah, we have lots of questions. I don't think we will be able to answer all of them, but let's select a few. Would you want me to read them out to you, because some of them are in Spanish, so I'm going to translate them.
Okay.
So while we answer questions, if you could please help me to answer a very quick poll regarding the event. It's just 3 questions telling us if you liked it or not, but we have some time to answer. So here's the poll. Now, here are the questions from Cesar. What pros and cons do you see in this new dimension that's been introduced in the guide for the Scrum Master? Now that he can be also a developer if it's needed.
I mean, in the way you can think about it, in the past, it was not excluded. The only thing we highly discourage to do is that the product owner and the Scrum Master are the same person. And the ways to think about it, for me, this was like the separation of power in a government, like judiciary, executive, legislative. Product owner is all about the product. That's what we have to accept. But full transparency, sprint review, product owner has to show what they created, and the Scrum Master is all about the process and protecting the team if this is required. So it was always allowed for the product owner to be part of the development team, and it's always been allowed for the Scrum Master to be part of the development team. And I have done it. I was Scrum Master and I was developer at the same time, which worked, but it also caused some confusion because sometimes people didn't know who's talking to them. Is it Ralph, the Scrum Master, or is it Ralph, the developer? So I usually had a head at work, maybe something like this year, like a Scrum head essentially. And whenever I was Scrum Master, I put on the hat so people knew how the Scrum Master is talking to us. And because sometimes people told me, you cannot tell us what to do. I'm not the Scrum Master right now. I'm the programmer, and I think we shouldn't do that. So I could kind of take the ambiguity out of those situations. So it works. It has some advantages. Well, there's always a flip side of the coin. It also has some disadvantages. Now, again, highly discouraged to have product owner and Scrum Master the same person, because then you get into this problem. I want all of this, but the team is not able to do that. But essentially, then you have to have this internal conflict. Maybe it works if you're schizophrenic somehow, that you can handle that with a split personality. But this is where we often see problems. But then on the other hand, if you want to work with Scrum and you have a startup and just say, hey, and I know how Scrum works, I have a good product idea, I can hire 2 developers. Should I not do Scrum? I don't think so. I just have to be aware there are some risks if I do something like that. If I make a call, am I biased in the way I'm thinking about it? Am I violating a rule? It's only 2 developers. Would they have to necessarily do a daily Scrum? Maybe they can just talk to each other if they're sitting in the same room. But I would solely apply the principles, implement the transparency, inspection, adaptations of Scrum.
Thanks. Another question by David. Ralph, do you think it is a good idea to include the product owner as a member of the developers for the construction of products?
Again, it's very situational. I personally, and I've been doing Scrum like 17 years plus, I never had it. But I know other trainers at Scrum.org, they had it. So if it makes sense, absolutely, go for it, do it. Again, there could be some, maybe it also depends what kind of product you're doing. If it's more very a technical product and the product owner doesn't have the technical background, probably not so good an idea. But maybe you do something about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and the product owner really knows what's important and he understands maybe some of the tools the developers. Why not be part of that and help them? Answer questions, be with them throughout the sprint. But on the other hand, there could be a product owner which maybe is never really at home because he's always going out and talking to customers, finding out what's going on. Therefore, he would delegate quite some of the product owner responsibilities into the Scrum team, but he would still stay accountable. So now those questions, I think these are really good questions, and I'm sorry if I'm not giving a yes or no answer, but the reality is always, it depends. And what I always try to to tell people is like, think about what it does it depend on. And if you make a decision, always think about what could be good about that call and what could be bad about that call, and get this understanding about the situational awareness.
Great. Is another question by Pamela. In a financial environment, what do you consider to be the best implementation technique for products and services that involve the fixed budget and time to be able to order them properly as product owner and cover the qualitative and quantitative part to defend that order?
So two things which are important. So you say fixed budget and fixed time. Well, that's brilliant. Then you can work with the scope. It gets problematic if you have fixed time, fixed scope, fixed budget. And this is where classical project management essentially kicks in, because now as a project manager, you deliver on time, on scope, on budget. And if you do that, you are a good project manager. Now, this is a rhetorical question. Can you be, as a company, have one project successfully delivered after the other, one after the other, that just basically pop out great, and still fail as a company? And the answer is yes, you could. Because successful projects does not necessarily make you as a company successful. Products make you successful. And this is another thing which amazes me. Like 25 years ago, Ken and Jeff, they didn't come up with a project owner, they came up with a product owner, because they understood the importance of having a focus on a product. So now if you have all three elements fixed, nailed down, fixed scope, fixed time, something else has to give, something always has to give. That's also a good question. If you kick off a new project or product development, ask the audience, what is going to give if things turn south, if things go bad? Because something, and the sad truth is, if you nail down scope, schedule, and budget, quality will suffer. You will create a product which looks nice, but it's done really, really badly. And this has long-term implications in maintenance, support costs, maintainability, expandability, new features, and so on. So you will really suffer after the first release to maintain and keep the product in a growing good state, essentially.
Okay, another question, anonymous. As well as the dev team, the suggestion that the PO should be on just one project could affect performance?
So actually, the way I think about it is that for me, Scrum Master is a role. You could be developer and Scrum Master, like in this way. But for me, I think about product owner. It's a function. You are product owner, period. That's what you do. And maybe they call you, when they hire you, a product manager. For me, a product owner is a product manager who thinks and acts in an agile way with an entrepreneurial combined agile mindset. And this means there should probably, if it's a real product and not just a widget, only one product. There's basically, if you do one product, that's more than enough work for product owner normally. Otherwise, what I often see is it's not a product. It's like a small, tiny bit of a big machinery, and you're product owner for that. But this is not a product. Because think about the value stream of your product, and usually it points outside your company, because there's someone outside the company, not on the company's payroll, who gets a benefit by using the product, and they are paying you, and this is your product. So if you take an insurance company, they probably have 12 different products. If you take a bank, maybe they have 20 products. So it's kind of, there's not too many products actually in most organizations. And therefore, product owner, yes, there's only one product owner per product, and it's usually a full-time job. If it isn't, ask yourself the question, have we identified the right product in regards to the people who are actually paying us? I like to think about the terms follow the money.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ralf. I think we're moving towards the end of the time box here. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the presentation and for answering questions. And thanks for being with us.
Sure, thanks. And yeah, all the best.